Okay, so I'm going to describe the Amplio system today, but in a different way than you might think. See, Amplio is not something I came up with to come up with my own approach. It's about the fifth generation of things that's based on basically about 10,000 conversations I had from around, I don't know, 2003 or 4 to about 2014. It was over about 10 years. And these were not just conversations like at clients. In fact, not counting those, that'd probably be about 20,000 conversations if I added those. These were conversations I had mostly at conferences where I talked to people about what worked, what didn't. And I talked to people at all levels. I mean, I talked to the people who are doing presentations, I talked to people who are attending them, and there were all levels there. There were a lot of successful people, a lot of unsuccessful people. And I had some really good consultants at Net Objectives. I said before, I considered myself, oh, maybe number four at best. There were definitely three I would consider better consultants than myself. I was pretty good. I just had some fabulous people. And I had learned how to let free thinking people think freely while being within the constraints of some things about a company. Like we were always focused on solving people's problems, not selling some solution. And it created a very inventive environment. And what's happened is Amplio has morphed basically. Like I said, it's about the fifth generation. It depends how you consider maybe one over the other. But it's finally reached the point of where I'm looking at what's really needed without trying to build off of other things other than things that are working. I mean, other collection of things. I build off that, but I'm not trying to like look at, well, what's popular out there and how can I do that? I think I've been really misguided in trying to think about frameworks, how to fix frameworks. I'm convinced now that frameworks are even configurable ones, which I've sometimes described Amplio as, are flawed because a framework at any one time, then you have to wonder, what's the framework telling me what to do? Well, if you're wanting to know what to do, why aren't you thinking about what your agreements are with people? And that's a better way because then you're talking directly to the people you're making agreements with. You're not having lots of people saying, we're going to follow this. It forces you to have the conversations you need to. Now, one thing that I will say going up front is the amount of knowledge Amplio reflects is huge. I don't think I quite appreciated myself until last night. For some reason, I got this idea, oh, maybe I'll list the 10 or 20 books that Amplio is based on. And I started writing down some of the books they were based on while my wife and I were watching a movie. And I was like, I just kept adding things and I organized them a little bit in affinity mapping about systems thinking, flow, lean, value stream management, organization, and value creation structures, theory of constraints, complexity. You can see these here. And just jumped to the end. I was kind of surprised. And this isn't all of them. I'm going to end up making a bibliography and links, but these are books I've read over the last 20 years or so. Some of these go back even further, I suppose. Yeah, some go back into the 90s. But these are books that I remember what I've actually taken out of and put into Amplio. And when you look at this, you say, oh my God, Alice, this is really complicated. And the answer is, this is really complicated. Building products, adding value to customers and to stakeholders is not a simple endeavor. And the idea of trying to create simple systems to solve a complex problem when you need more than just a simple system is what causes a lot of the problems that we have. Now, you don't want a complex solution either. You want something that's maybe built fully and in a complex manner to get to a simple way of following it. It's kind of ironic when you think about it. Artificial intelligence, which really isn't intelligence, but whatever, the language models that we have, These have been under development for 20 years or longer. I mean, you can go back to artificial intelligence back to the 70s, the AI lab at MIT, which I don't think did particularly a good job, but there have been a lot of AI labs out there since. And it's been decades in the process. The idea of something like ChatGPT or any of these AI tools is not that the tool is built simply, but that using it is simple. And this gets confused. Scrum touts itself as simple to understand and difficult to master. And it's a simply built framework. A simply built framework is not necessarily a good framework. Actually, I'm not sure there are such a thing as good frameworks, as I said. But we have to focus, we have to shift the focus. In fact, maybe that's one of the first things is when I'm going to talk about. I'm going to go through this list here. We want to shift from the first thing, shift from how simply something is designed to how simply it can be used. And I believe this is one of the big misunderstandings we have out there is that people are always talking about how, oh, this is so simple in its design, or oh, this is so complex in its design. And you don't really care. You care about how simple it is to use, or really how elegant it is, how natural it is. And I think that's a key piece to it. So what I want to look at, and here I'll make this bigger because I'm going to work through this file. Now I thought about doing a PowerPoint. I decided I wasn't going to do a PowerPoint. There's a reason for it. I do want to have some conversations about this. In fact, I'm going to put the chat so I can read it up off to the side right in front of me because I want you to add things and ask questions as I go. I mean, otherwise I'm just going to ramble on. You all know I'm very capable of that. But I would prefer you to question things. And actually, Susan being here reminds me of one of our mottos is keep calm and carry on. And what we mean by that, I didn't say calm, I said qualm. That was something Susan said in one of our sessions. When people are a little nervous or don't understand something, I always like questions to be asked. But qualm was a term Thomas used to like, well, I'm not sure I'm unhappy or I'm questioning, but I have a little feeling like a qualm. And then Susan said, keep calm and carry on. So if you get qualms about something, I say just any little disturbance, please chat, put it in the chat or raise your hand. I'd like this to be more of a discussion, but I want to be really clear that I'm not creating something based on my opinion. I mean, obviously my opinion and my judgments in this, but it's really based on what we saw at Net Objectives worked, what I saw when I was at the PMI with Scott Ambler and Mark Lyons with Discipline Agile, which I have a lot of respect for, and unfortunately hate to see its demise with none of its thought leaders present anymore in the PMI. And I believe that when you talk to thousands of people and see what works, yes, it could be considered anecdotal. I don't have the data in that way, but I've also incorporated some of the great thought leaders, people like, Tom Gill, Don Reinertson, Ellie Goldratt, Russ Acop, all sorts of people, Deming, a lot of Deming, Chris Alexander. And as I mentioned, basically over 100 books I've read over the last 20, 25 years uh, that kind of have a central theme when you actually try to integrate them. I actually believe this is my great skill, is I'm a good integrator of other people's ideas. I've got a few of my own, but the integration of ideas is the big thing. So what I want to do over this next hour is go through where we are first. Like, what are the problems we have? See, before you offer solutions, it's always good to understand the problem. That seems so self-evident, but you know what? That may actually be the biggest problem with Agile. Virtually all the Agile approaches taken don't look to see what the problem is. They just offer a solution. There's no diagnostic. And I'll talk about that some more, but when you think about that, that creates a one-size-fits-all solution. I don't care how flexible it is once you get in there. And actually, frameworks aren't very flexible. Scrum is immutable, and SAFe, for all intents and purposes, is immutable as a framework. Now, that doesn't mean you can't fix them, because you can. And in fact, Amplio is designed as a system that could stand on its own or can be moved and used on any existing situation. And I do mean any existing situation. It gets more or less usable in the sense that some of its provided practices may not be as applicable in your situation. So I acknowledge that. But what we find in Amplio University, which is where I teach it, I don't know, I teach it actually. I do teach it, but I kind of consider myself the chief headmaster because I'm learning as much as the people in it. We basically take it as there are no experts per se. We all have different expertise and we talk and engage in things and it kind of morphs, which could be a problem for some, but I consider that what you need to do. That's called growth. So here's the thing I'm going to go through. I'm just going to go through each one of these individually. And like I said, I'm going to update it as we go. I should probably I'll keep maybe I can't shut it off because it's kind of aggravating that it's, uh, I've got, Grammarly, which I like, but when you're trying to show it, it's got all those markups for what's wrong. And I disagree with it sometimes. Okay. So I've said this, it's basically, this is like my fifth defined approach over the last 20 years. It's based on how to create the greatest value to critical stakeholders in the quickest amount of time while providing a great working environment for the people doing the work. You might guess then it's going to have something to do with lean, and it's going to have a lot to do with taking care of people. And it recognizes there's no single solution available for all situations, but here's something you could disagree with rather. But every situation has a solution that is best for it, or I should say has maybe more than one. There could be a family of solutions, maybe a better way to say it. Because sometimes you might have two or three that are trade-offs and they're about equally comparable, but there is kind of an ideal. And guess what? That's actually going to change over time. That's one of the problems with frameworks. They don't change over time. Okay, so here's what I want to do. I want to look at the requirements for an approach, our current challenges, and what's needed. Okay, and this is important. So that's how I'm going to go through this day. Okay. And I'm going to suggest that we don't want frameworks to follow. We want to create agreements amongst our people to be effective. This is the big shift for me recently. When you follow frameworks, people often have different interpretations of them. I've actually now seen CST, certified Scrum trainers from the Scrum Alliance, argue with each other what the Scrum Guide means. Now, that's kind of amazing when you think about it. If they can't agree on it, how can people trying to follow it agree on it? And I see the same thing with SAFe, especially because SAFe redefines some very critical terms. Like MMF is one example. Value streams is not quite as bad. But there are a lot of different things they reinvent. And then if somebody actually knows what they really mean and they hear it, they got to know, well, is this the SAFe reinvention of the term, or is this what the original term meant? MMFs, MVPs, all sorts of things are redefined in that. And you cannot change definitions. The lack of precision. Ooh, that's another real big problem. I'm just going to put a note in here. The lack of precision is a real killer in the definition. You have to know what you're talking about. You can't just say, oh, we're going to define it for us. No, because somebody comes in and they don't know it, or somebody didn't look at that definition. That's kind of insanity. Insanity meaning doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting a different result. I will admit, however, I am insane when it comes to coffee. I keep expecting this is going to be the wake-up call for the day, and it doesn't usually happen. But anyway, so these are the requirements. There are some requirements for how you're doing things. You need a quick start. There's no question you need a quick start. You can't take on something and have it take months to get going. And I have seen ways to do relatively quick starts. Now, it depends. At the team, it's really quick. I can do a team in a day or less. But if it's organization, that might take a couple of months or a few months to at least get started, get some basic training going. There is a good idea to have a standardization of objectives. You need people on the same page, but you need flexibility in implementations. You can find or train people with the necessary knowledge. If it's an unknown approach and you can't get other people to follow it, you're going to have problems. Simple as that. That doesn't mean you need to find them. You might need to train them yourself. Provide solutions to solve certain problems at certain sizes. In other words, this reinvention, this purposely incomplete attitude, or this presenting approaches that are all over the board just doesn't make any sense to me. It just causes rework. An engineering approach, an attitude that we're going to find what works for our situation is vastly missing, grossly missing. You also need a support system for learning, making decisions, and working together. Why trainers are the only ones who have this, I have no clue. It's insane, in my opinion. Okay, there are a lot of anti-patterns to overcome. So what I'm trying to do is drive what do we need to do. Lack of theory. This has been demonstrated for centuries. Causes resistance and slow learning. Telling people to follow till you understand is demeaning and illustrates a lack of ability to explain up front. Okay. People are exposed to new concepts, rather how to work with people who don't have the values you want them to. In other words, if you say, well, this thing works when you have these values, or these values will result in this thing working, which is actually part of what Scrum does. Well, what if people don't have those values? What do? People's values change incredibly slowly. Their behavior changes slowly, not as slow, but you can get people to change behavior with the same values when they actually shift what's in it for them, when they can maybe identify with the bigger picture, when they get past any fears. But how do you do that? People exposed to concepts, but unable to apply them in the workplace. This way of training in short bursts is ineffective because even, first of all, people are going to forget most of what they learned, but they have no chance of trying it in the workplace, which means, of course, they have to take another workshop, which is great for people who are providing the workshops. Being purposefully incomplete requires reinventing known practices. The reason this is done is because if you try to provide every solution, you get overwhelmed. See, the real thing is you don't want to overwhelm people, but maybe there's a way to provide how to get known solutions in your context that's not provided, because that takes theory, which isn't presented, and it takes another structure for solutions, which most people don't do. I'll talk about that a little later, but it's basically the way Christopher Alexander defines his patterns, which is quite different than the way most Agile approaches define patterns. Certainly, Scrum patterns are not Alexandrian style patterns. They're solutions to recurring problems. But Alexander's patterns are recurring problems in a context. In other words, it allows you to adjust them, but that's not present in Agile. Okay, people learn new concepts, don't know how to convey them. That's important. I actually admit I didn't know this until about 3 years ago myself. I was doing one of my first workshops after leaving the PMI. People kept saying, Al, but how do we convey that to other people? So I thought, oh, yeah, that's a good point. So I thought of making a separate coaching workshop, but then I realized, no, I have to integrate it into the learning workshop of concepts and how you do things, because you want to learn something new, like maybe why managing work in process is important, but you understand it. How do you convey that to others? Immutability precludes fit for purpose solutions. It also makes approaches brittle, because if you don't do one little thing, does it break the approach? The belief we can't understand what's happening. This is rampant. I've been called so many things because no, you can understand a lot of what's going on. You don't understand everything that's going on. But if you can take advantage of what you do understand, you can overcome what you don't understand. There are a lot of essential practices missing. And I think the biggest one is expensive and ineffective training. The belief it takes years to become effective. No, it does not. You may take years to become a really good coach if you need to have a personality adjustment like I did. Took me years. I was a horrible coach back in the 90s. But I committed to being a good coach actually around 97. And by 2000, 2001, I was actually a really good coach. I was always been a good trainer because in a training environment, you have a little bit more control. But in coaching, you don't have any control. And it took me, I don't know, took me about 2, 3 years to become decent, about another 2, 3 years to become good. And then over time, I think I'm really a great coach now. Okay. So here's the question to ask. Why are you asking what the framework says? Why aren't you looking for what works? We want a system that empowers you to think for yourself, not one to follow. I want to pause for this a minute. Does this make sense? Are there questions about this? See, this is fundamental to me. What do we want? Something to follow or something to help us think?
Well, in my case, definitely something to help us think, because that enables you to actually observe what the problem is and observe whether what you're trying works or not.
Yeah. Now, there is the concern. I'm going to put this quote up here. It makes more sense at this point. There is this idea that, well, maybe I can't figure this out. So some people will have some fear about that. I know you, Susan. I know you've got a lot of experience and you have confidence you can figure things out. If not totally, at least move in the right direction. So it takes a little bit more experience, perhaps a little bit of overcoming fear. See, because when you think and come up with your own solution, you're now accountable and responsible. When you do something a framework tells you and it doesn't work, you can always blame the framework, which is kind of funny because we have this agile blame game. People do the frameworks, say that doesn't work, and people who promote the framework say, well, those people weren't using it. That doesn't get us anywhere. So that's another problem. How do we think better? And I love this quote by Jeff Dunneman. A good tool improves the way you work. A great tool improves the way you think. Most people who talk about tools are just tools aren't thinking about great tools. And yes, a good carpenter doesn't blame their tool, but that's because a good carpenter will know what tool to use. And the tools will also guide their work on how to do things. If you look at really good carpenters, they have a lot of stuff that they do that helps them. Okay, any other thoughts? Are we good? Okay, so here's what I'm going to suggest is the shift needed. Shift from how simply something is designed to how simply it can be used. Tesla is much more complicated than a Model T, or I think it was the AC before it. But man, I'd rather have one. I don't care how complex it is to design. They use AI in that thing. They use all sorts of stuff in that thing beyond my comprehension, but it makes it easier to use. Okay. There's an old joke about this. This guy's trying to impress a girl at a party. So he talks about how he just got an MBA and he knows all this stuff. But he said, but I don't really understand how a radio works. And she said, oh, that's simple. You just turn it on. And it actually illustrates, I mean, the guy's kind of being a little bit of a pompous ass, maybe, but it illustrates the idea that how it works inside is one thing and how it works outside is something else. And we want to worry about how our approaches work outside and not praise them for their simple design. Sorry, we were out of town for about 5 days, so this cat is more manic than normal. uh okay. So we need this shift. And we want to have people thinking, creating decisions themselves, how they work together. This way you learn to think for yourself so you can add to change. You have a fit for purpose way of working, or you discover it as you go. And people then understand why they're working the way they are. See, that's really critical. Oh, we're following safe. Oh, well, why? I mean, that could cause resistance in and of itself, and or put in any term there. But oh, we're doing this because we think this is our best way of doing this. By the way, David Anderson and I talked about this was the real important distinction in Kanban back in 2009, and we were somewhat raked over the coals with it by Jeff and Ken. for any number of reasons. But I believe part of it is the belief that you can't do this because there's no theory. See, when you have a theory on how things are working, you can then make agreements that are consistent. And this isn't my theory. This isn't your theory. I don't really care about my theory or your theory. I want to care about what actually is reality. So we have to look objectively at what's going on and take a scientific approach. Now, admit the amount to learn at first appears daunting, but the cost in dollars can be made low by using modern training methods, and the cost in time can be made low by incorporating theory and having new concepts be presented in a way you can relate to them. Now, I'm walking my talk here. I mean, some people will just say this is a sales pitch, but Amplio University right now is $1,000 for 6 months, and you can extend it after that for $800 every 6 months because it's designed as an ongoing training program, and people have upped for like they're in their second year of it because we're always learning new things, and it provides a lot. And it basically provides, I don't know, if you were to take the things we cover, like say Scrum at Scale, Kanban, a lot of things about how to improve SAFe. It's got an integrated coaching and UX workshop. You'd be paying 5 to 10 grand for that. So it's possible to do better training. In fact, I've studied curriculum training methods for 4 decades now. And I've learned a lot. I've created some new things actually, but I've learned, back of the room training, what's called synergogy, which is a blend of pedagogy and andragogy, child and adult learning, and all sorts of things, flipped classroom learning, things of that nature. And I got to tell you, the quick 2-day workshop to learn something at an individual role could be a wake-up call maybe to learn some new concepts, but it more or less violates every rule of continuous education that I know of, all sorts of things. So yeah, the normal way of training, this is daunting. Like I mentioned earlier, I pull, and this isn't even complete. I'm sure as I start completing the list, I'll get up to about 130 books. I think it's slowing down. These are books I've read over the last 20 years. These aren't all the books I've read over the last 20 years. These are the books that have a direct impact on Amplio. I've read, this probably represents about half the books. Obviously, I read books I'm interested in my work, so it's biased that way. So here's what's provided. What I call a values first mindset. This I learned from Tom Gilt. This is from his book, Competitive Engineering, and everything Tom does reeks of you've got to identify your critical stakeholders, their values, their success criteria, and any constraints. Now, critical stakeholders could be the government if you're in a regulated environment, could be another company. You need a theory to explain the underlying cause and effects. Ellie Goldratt calls this inherent simplicity. You need value stream analysis. It's finally becoming in vogue. This is like, oh, who knows, 4 decades old, 5 decades old, but it's been at least being written about since the 80s and 90s. Provide a tell which practices will work better for you. I call these the factors for effective value streams based on the theory of first principles. And yet people deny. This is one I've been called. I remember I won't say who, but another approach said that when I wrote the article about these, he just said this is all bullshit. He didn't ask me how it could work or why it could work or how I'd use this successfully. This is the common attitude in the Agile space. If somebody does something that you haven't been successful at, you call it bullshit. Instead of asking, hey, I wasn't successful in this. How did you do it? I've never been asked that question by the promoters of other approaches. Not once. Not once. In all these years have I been asked, hey, I was not successful in that. How did you do it? Now, they may not believe me. That's okay. But the fact that I don't even get the question asked is maybe a real telling of the problem we have in the industry. Alexandrian patterns are patterns to solutions, are solutions to recurring problems in a context. Those last 3 words are very critical in a context. You can't figure them out unless you have some of this stuff because you can't see what to do in a context. You want to appeal to the better nature of people so they want to do what's right. This is part of coaching. I guess you have to have an attitude that people are good. I do. I mean, there are some bad people. And by the way, all roles have some good people and some bad people. And with all roles, if you treat them going in as if they're bad people, that they're not motivated, that's how they will show up. Because that's how people interact with people. How you work with people when they don't have the values, you have to show them that if they really don't have the values, if you have got somebody who's only selfish and thinking about themselves and not seeing the better need of the company, that's probably a bad situation. But very often those people don't realize their values are consistent with the bigger picture. You just have to talk to them and let them discover what's there. Provide lessons so people can try over time so people can see what's in their workplace. Okay. Integrate how to convey new concepts with the new concepts. Now, there are two reasons for this. One is this actually validates that you understand the new concept. You've had this experience. Everybody's had this experience where when you explain something to somebody, you understand it better, or possibly you understand you're wrong. I've had that. This is why I like paired. When I used to run a company where I was the CIO and CTO and I had to get people to understand what was going on, I would actually have them shadow me and I would explain things to them. And what was funny, at first I thought this was going to slow me down, but it sped me up. Why? Because I had to explain why I was doing what I was doing. And sometimes in that explanation, I realized, oh, that's not right. Where did you get that idea from? I mean, I would actually even just tell them that, oh, no, that's not right. I never questioned that before. But when you hear yourself kind of on loudspeaker, you start thinking about it and noticing. It's why pairing is actually very efficient. Why mobbing is also potentially good. Mobbing, I don't think is a universal thing, but where it works, it's really awesome. Immutability. This precludes fit for purpose solutions. It also makes approaches brittle. Well, how immutable can you be? How changeable? I mean, if something's immutable and then you just like, I'll give a simple example. The daily scrum is supposed to happen every day at the same time. What if we do daily scrums every day, but we sometimes do it at 9 in the morning and sometimes do it at 10 in the morning? Oh, I'm not doing scrum anymore. Well, that's silly. Of course you are. But where do you draw the line? Immutability is silly. You need to say why you're trying to do what you're doing. Again, this is an example of simple being wrong. The intention is, and everybody knows where it is. Yeah, but maybe there's another factor besides knowing where it is called other meetings. Okay. Again, I just can't rail against this enough. I think training is 5 to 10 times more expensive than what it should be. 5 to 10 times. Yes, $1,000 is what I charge, and it covers 5 to 10 grand of other training. Now, I admit I'm lucky that I can start a new company and try this out as an experiment. But I think over the last 3 years, we've proven it's valid, proven it's true, and I do it by using new modern methods. And I'm not talking about self-study. I'm talking about live training. Um, Provided diagnostic tool. This is the one I started with. How could you not look at what your problem is? Agile is the only place where most of the people don't look at what their problem is before offering a solution, while they complain about customers telling them what solutions they have without looking at problems. That's the irony. I just take a deep breath here. You need a quick start, but you could ask a few questions. So yeah, if you're doing it at the team level, you got to ask 2 or 3 questions like, well, can we do sprints? Or are we have to have a flow model, a 1 day, see what's coming in? Do we have cross-functional teams? Well, maybe not. Then how do we organize our people? But there are not that many questions. How to improve existing approaches being taken. If the idea is your approach can work in different situations, then one of the situations is, oh, they're doing safe here. Oh, they're doing scrum here. Oh, they're doing less here. That's a situation. Is hardware involved? Is regulation involved? So it could be done from scratch or it could be laid on top of existing things. That's very important. How to create quality UXs. UX has been so bad for so long, we kind of think it's normal. It isn't normal. When I was in the hair salon business back in the 80s and 90s, I developed some software that I could take. And this was the days people didn't have stylists, hairstylists. They didn't have computers. These are people who had never touched a computer, never wanted to touch a computer. I'm not talking about the managers in front, but I had software. I could show them how to get what they needed done in 15 minutes. Really. This was on DOS machines too, the 24 rows, 80 columns, stupid screens, limitations. How could I do that? Well, I had learned years before that you had to come from what people expected something to do. So they knew their job. And I just wrote the system. So when they asked a question, it came from where a stylist, it was like the system would respond based on what a stylist would want, not so much I built the system and you've got to learn the system. Flipping that is not that hard from a doing point of view. It's a very big mind shift. The best book on this, by the way, it's not where I actually learned it, but it's a great book, is The Design of Everyday Things by Norman. Brilliant, brilliant book. Missing practices. I just listed a few here, but there's so many. Minimum valuable increments. We don't have an artifact. You look at virtually every framework out there. I know Steve Tendon's TameFlow has this, but it's not a framework. It's also an organization of patterns like Amplio is, of Alexandrian style patterns. Is what is the artifact that we're trying that encapsulates, that comprises the next thing we're going to release? It's not an epic. Epics are too big. It's not a feature. Features are usually too small. This is based on the idea of minimum marketable feature of Denning, Cleland, and Wang, but not everybody's marketing. Plus, Safe has destroyed the meaning of the term. They destroyed it by changing it, but then saying that's what Denning, Cleland, and Wang said, which it isn't. It's just mind-boggling. So we call them minimum valuable increments, and it includes things when you've got like an MVP and I'm discovering of something of value till this huge thing that might take a long time to release. Double loop learning. I haven't written this up, but one of my aces talked about it as being there's like, in a sense, you're in double loop learning. You're not just seeing how to do what you're doing better. We call that type one learning. How do I do this particular practice better? We also learn to see if there's a better way to do it by challenging our assumptions. This is an old concept by Chris Ardress. Excuse me. And then PDSA, Plan, Do, Study, Act, is quite different from Inspect and Adapt. Because in inspect and adapt to me is like playing whack-a-mole. Something went wrong and you've got to figure out how to fix it. Something else goes wrong, you figure out how to fix it. Something else goes wrong, you figure out how to fix it. But as Ken Schwaber, one of the creators of Scrum is a black box. You don't know what's in the box. These things just pop up and we knock them down. In Plan, Do, Study, Act, or if you prefer, a comparable but not quite the same, is if you've heard of John Boyd, the observe, orient, decide, act. They're not the same, but they're comparable. They have different time frames, both of which can be adjusted. So John Boyd was the fighter pilot who basically changed modern warfare. It's really interesting reading. But in Plan, Do, Study, Act, which comes from, Stewart initially had it, and then Deming talked more about it. So it's usually it's either called the Deming cycle or the Short cycle. But it has to do with you're going to look to see what happened. You're going to plan something, you see what happens, and then you look to see what changes in your understanding are. So double loop learning and Plan, Do, Study, Act are very related to each other. OODA is the same thing, related. There should be a support system. Why do you train somebody to be a Scrum Master and then you don't give them any tools to be a Scrum Master? It's insane. You've got them. Give them away. And this includes collaboration boards. Like I mentioned, some decisions needed to be made. So those are included. Then lean management. So well, where's Amplio in all this? I haven't talked about Amplio. Well, yes, I have. See, if these are the requirements.
I heard it, Sven.
I'm sorry, what? Was that you, Frederick? I didn't understand it.
Sorry. My mic was on.
Oh, okay. No worries. No worries. That happens. Well, actually, Amplio is a system to meet these requirements. That's how I built it. I didn't come up with, what's a cool system? I've never done that. It's never made sense to me. I guess that's well, I got to admit, until about 10 years ago, I was mostly mathematician. That's my training. I have a master's in mathematics, theoretical mathematics from Emory. I do have a master's in computer science and electrical engineering from MIT. And actually, when I went there, I was, what is it you call it when you go to a college and you're not qualified to be there? I got into MIT because I was a smart guy. I had a lot of things to prove. I was a smart guy, but I had no engineering background whatsoever. I came from a liberal arts school with a theoretical mathematics background. And because of that, they said, well, you're accepted, but you have to take these engineering classes your first year. Like I was a remedial student. Now, let me tell you, the classes they made me take were not simple. These were high level undergraduate classes. These were like what seniors and juniors at MIT were taking, but for me, it was a big jump. Fortunately, I knew physics and stuff like that, and I made the shift. I did well. But it was like remedial education for engineers. But when I met Don Reinertson years ago, I started really, he kept teaching. He was great. Just loved the guy. And he kind of took me under his wing and knew I was too theoretical. I was always pragmatic. You could be pragmatic and theoretical at the same time, but because you're going to look to see if your theories are working. And he just kept saying, no, Al, you've got to be more like an engineer. He didn't ever say it that way, but he was nicer than that. But that was clearly what he meant. And being under his tutelage for about, I don't know, it took about 4 or 5 years, I think, before it really made the shift. So I'm still maybe more mathematician, but I got a lot more engineering. And being in the coaching world, consulting world, I have a psychology degree as well. And I've learned more about how people are in the 80s. This was well after school. I graduated that. I got that in 74. So this Amplio, notice I don't really talk about it here, but I am, because Amplio is designed to solve every one of these requirements. That's how I designed it. Because why else? What else would I do? Yet I don't believe these things are attended to. In most Agile, well, none in Agile frameworks. Some of them are attended to in some things. Like Lest has some good stuff in it that I like. Actually, Safe has some good stuff in it I like. Even Scrum has some good stuff that I like. But they don't take this main thing. Okay, so this is mostly what I wanted to present, because that's what Amplio is. It gives you all the stuff. It's designed for all this stuff. Oh, well, I guess one other thing here. It does look overwhelming. I agree with that. It is. But only if you give it to somebody all at once. It's like when we first started doing Agile, there was this funny question asked, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. That's Agile in a sense. You do one little thing at a time, one little step at a time. You don't build the whole thing. And you do the same thing here. This must be presented one bit at a time. So what's provided, I should say maybe what I need to do is say, well, maybe I'll put it after this. Oh, lean management's an important thing. Our management in Agile has been ignored and people then overreact to it. I should say requirements for this. I'll say it that way. Only expose what's needed at the start. Allow for incremental learning. In other words, think of a student taking this and learning this as a customer. We don't give everything to them all at once. We do it in little bits, little bits, little bits. There's a really good book on UX that I read back, a long time ago. I think it was in the, I think it was in the 90s. And it came back in print, which is really great because it wasn't in print for a long time. Why don't I go to the table of contents? What an idea. The Elements of Friendly Software Design by Paul Heckel. He had a really great metaphor. He called it, he made it look like you're doing a movie. Have you ever noticed when you start a movie, maybe you've seen the trailers, but you ever watch a movie where you've not seen the trailers? So they give you little bits and little bits and little bits. You give you what they can understand. Now, some movies are intended for shock value, and they throw you in a situation without any understanding, and you're confused. And what's interesting about the movie is getting out of the confused state. And there are some movies like that, and they're kind of entertaining as well, because you're there trying to figure out what the hell is going on. But most movies start where you can understand what's happening, and then it evolves over time. That's how software should be. You don't want to be taking a software package saying, what the F is going on? You don't get enjoyment out of that because you're trying to get your job done. So don't do those kind of movies. He wasn't talking about those. He was talking about, let's just start with what you know and then let's expand. So that's actually a requirement for this. So this is how, again, education needs to be done. It evolves, it's exposed over time. And what's important, not everyone has the same needs. So must enable people to pick their curriculum. That's why we have all these different tracks. Now, what have I left out, or what do you have qualms about?
Well, I I think the big problem here for a lot of people is that they they find it very difficult to go from concretes to abstractions.
Or the other way
And
around, or it's
and the
both,
other or
actually.
the other way around.
Yeah,
Yeah,
different people have different problems. Yeah.
because that's how you get people talking past each other in this
Ah,
space a
very
lot.
good. Very good. Thank you. Because we talk about this and I keep forgetting. Keep going. Keep going. Sorry.
And one of the I mentioned earlier that I'd been going through Suzanne Robertson's and James Robertson's Mastering the Requirements Progress,
Yeah.
their latest edition.
Yeah. I've started
And
to read that, by the way.
one of the things they point out partway through it is that the business problem that you're trying to figure out a solution for is abstract. Any particular solution is concrete. But a business problem is capable of many solutions because it's it's in the implementation of the solution that you get down to concrete.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. This is something that I've alluded to in Amplio, but I don't address enough. And I did write a case study, but how you really need to become expert in the field you're writing the customer for, the software for, or whatever product you're building. You need to know more than they know, because you need to understand the possibilities that they don't see. And when you look at inventive products, whether it's software or not products, the creator saw something that the users didn't even imagine. And they only saw it because they understood. There are all sorts of these. Morito, who was CEO of Sony at the time, was the guy who got the idea of the Sony Walkman. He recognized that people liked music, but it was hard to carry boom boxes with them. So you couldn't exercise and have music at the same time. He got this idea in New York. He was overlooking the Central Park, the big open park in the middle of New York City in Manhattan. And he saw people running without music, and he saw people walking with boom boxes, because the runners were committed to their health, and those people walking with boom boxes like music. And it occurred to them that maybe you'd like to do both. And at that time, if you saw somebody running with a boom box in New York City, well, that's another story entirely. But so the idea of the Walkman came into existence. And what was interesting is he had a hard time conveying this to his technical staff. They kept trying to make smaller tape recorders. And he said, we don't want a recorder. In fact, he eventually had to say, if you come back to me with one more smaller recorder, I'm going to fire you. And then they had to, by the way, very often visionaries have to say that to their employees. Ford talked about getting a single engine. He didn't say he'd fire him, but he wanted a single block V8, and they kept saying it was not possible. And he said, you've got to come from it is possible, and you figure out how to do it. Not satisfied with a dual block V8. So This is really good. So we have to, in fact, Amplio does this too. I'll admit, this is maybe one of my weak points. I do talk about abstraction. I talk about concrete. I talk about going both ways. I tend to be more of an abstract thinker. But I'll say it's a weakness I have, but that's why we run Amplio the way we do. Everybody has weaknesses. Everybody has strengths. The way you learn is working as a group, and people like Susan and actually Patrick here too, and Thomas, they're always telling me what I left out or how I need to say it another way. See, that's what creates good learning. That's why I consider myself more the headmaster of Amplio, not the lead instructor, because I mean, I may be doing the one who's talking the most, but I actually try to minimize that. Not in this session, obviously. So yes, we have to figure out how to do that. And this is actually both for requirements. I like that you said that and mentioned that book. And for how to do our work and for how to convey ideas. See, how we're working, what we're trying to solve, and how we're working together are integrated, yet they're taught separately. That makes no sense to me. Why do we teach coaching? Why do we teach UX? Why do we teach process? Why do we teach requirements separately? And what you just said, Susan, points out that they recognize that's not what you do. It doesn't make sense to do them separately. This is the missing part of systems thinking.
Yes.
Agile is supposed to be about people, but mostly Agile frameworks tell people what to do, ignoring the fact that they're not going to do that because they don't understand it. They don't understand the why. Scrum doesn't even say why it's doing what it's doing. It just presumes it works. And if you follow it to understand, you'll eventually get it. And maybe you won't. They don't say that last part. Okay, so other concerns. Yeah, this is a big one. Thank you, Susan. I'll have to add this in. Well, I just did add it in here. Here, I think I can actually, I'll tell you what I'll do, because I don't really mind if you have a, hang on a second. While you're thinking, I'm going to put something in a minute. Oh, trying to get the chat up, but now it's not showing it to me for some reason. I was going to put in the chat the link to here so you could look at it instead of, since you can't really see this document. Here we go.
Al, I do have a question,
Here we go.
comment,
Please,
if
please,
I may.
Carl. Yeah, there's a link, by the way. You can look at this. Please don't change it. No, you can add comments, I suppose. But anyway, yes, Carlos, go ahead.
Appreciate it. Thank you. Al, in your perspective, where do you think, new graduates will be getting some of this kind of foundational items and things that you are addressing with Amplio and Cerny? Because certainly, I value it from now, 15 years in the workforce and stuff like that. And then the changes that I'm seeing, pre-COVID and so forth. Certainly, I value this. But where do you think that some of these fundamentals need to be introduced in why not? I heard you talk a little bit about like the training and the learning. And that's great for, if people in the workforce have the incentive to kind of get familiar with some of these things and be addressing some of those foundational type of things and being able to kind of get training and so forth. But then is there a space for, younger kind of professionals to start kind of getting some of this content? Just kind of would like to kind of hear a little bit of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, it's a great question because this thing started out, Amplo is kind of in its already third generation over the last 3 years. So when I started out, I originally thought I'm going to create what I call an Amplio development, how to like do team level stuff. Okay. And this was going to be online over time, but mostly here's how you do this kind of thing. And then we added integrated in the coaching. So that was kind of an entry level program at that point. But then I'm not quite sure why I shifted. I think it was more just that it felt more needed. I started what I called the Amplio Consultant Educators Program. For this was for kind of experts already to become better. But then I looked at it and I started addressing where you are talking about. And I kind of created curriculum more entry level. Like, how do you do Scrum better? How do you do Kanban? How do you do SAFe better? How do you do any of these things better? And I'll admit right now, and I've been thinking about this, that I presume that people have some experience in Agile already. Like a lot of people have already had, say, a CSM class or have had some Kanban training. And I'm not going down to the beginning level at the moment. But one of the things I'm planning to do, and when I get somebody who comes in at this level, that's often how I design things, by the way. I wait till somebody comes in and needs something, and then I expand the curriculum. It turns out something as like Scrum or Kanban, when you get down to the core of the principles underneath it, is not hard to do. So adding a couple of sessions, and when I say that, I say this based on experience, not based on my mind of it. The very first Scrum training I did was in 2001 when I went in for some design pattern training, and I realized they didn't understand the power of incremental development and not building big designs ahead of time. It was a small team. It was 6 people. In fact, it led to one of my great coaching tips. I'm there, the manager's in front of me, one guy who leads one part of the team. There's 6 people, but there are only, for whatever reason, 2 team members and the manager there. And I'm there, and these 2 team members are arguing with each other about a fundamental thing. And I'm sitting there thinking, what the F am I doing here? And I wanted to put my head in my hands. This is the coaching tip. As a consultant, never put your head in your hands like this and shake your head. That's not a good move. So I didn't, but I was thinking it big time. So I realized I needed to give them a little bit of Scrum training because I knew Scrum. I'd been doing XP, but they didn't need XP because I taught them patterns. And in an hour, I spent an hour talking to them about how to do Scrum. And they did it without any further work on my part because it's really simple when you have a cross-functional team and when they know how to build things incrementally. So I think that's something I will add when I get somebody who doesn't have that entry level stuff. In fact, I might do that anyway, and I'll tell you why. Because most of the problems people have at the entry level is because they're given a lot of nonsense to begin with. And it'd be better to just have something that says, here's how you start from ground zero. Now, one thing I do have that I'm just starting to talk about, but I've written it up and I have it. If you think about this whole thing I'm saying, a shift in from frameworks to agreements. So I do have this thing I call Amplio Scrum, and I have to redefine it a little bit now in this model. But think about, what is Scrum? Scrum is a set of agreements you've made, isn't it? We're going to build things incrementally. We're going to have retrospections. We're going to have daily Scrums. We're going to do this, whatever. What if you shifted it from we're going to do these ceremonies? What if we shifted it from we're going to do these events? So these are agreements we're making with each other. This is how we're working together. Well, that's not a lot. And I've written documents on that, by the way. So in some sense, I already have it, but what it would be is, here, go read this and then ask questions. So I actually do have it. Go read this and then ask questions. So actually, when I think about it, I think go read this and then ask questions. If I added a session on this, and I'll add this to this when I write this up. There's the what I call the why of Scrum or something. In fact, if you look at Scrum and you stop for a moment and ask, why are they telling me to do this? You learn a lot. In fact, this goes to what you said, Susan. Scrum is very specific. Do this. Have sprints. Why are you having sprints? Doesn't explain that. Yeah, it's good in certain situations. So yeah, I appreciate the concept, Carlos, because I'm actually, now that I'm explaining to us, Al, you're really close to this. All you have to do is say, here's the starting, and maybe run one for Scrum. One episode is all it takes to explain Scrum. Now, you have to learn the foundations. But see, I have that. See, when I talk about what's missing, like from the foundations point of view, I'll show you this. If you go to Success Engineering, my site, and here's Amplio University, I have a link right here, the curriculum, AU curriculum. Scroll down a little bit because I explain it. See, I have this thing called the Amplio Foundations, and it covers all this stuff. Why theory is important, standing on the shoulders of giants, you know, and it walks you through these. These all have videos and materials underneath them. Okay. Every one of these has a video and an article about that. And then, of course, part of Amplio U is get questions asked and answered. So I'd say I actually have it to some level, but I like creating a more of a focus. So does that answer your question there? Is that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah. And here's the key. And this is why I'm so adamant about this. There are a lot of people out there that I view as really, we have trained a lot of incompetent coaches, and I'm sorry to be harsh, but that's where we are. I talked about this in the session yesterday. The demand is so great that people have gotten in with almost no training, and they're not really competent. And Chat GPT and the other AI tools is going to have a devastating effect, not because they're really good, but because managers will not differentiate the potential value of AI versus a Scrum Master who's had just 2 days of training and a little bit of expertise. Now, some people are going to be scared of this, but some people are going to see there's an opportunity here because with theory and with some experience, you can leapfrog the masses that are out there that are struggling with theory or without the theory. Kant talks about without theory, you're blind. You can't see what's going on. Deming talks about without theory, your experience is useless because you can't build on it. Da Vinci goes back, Da Vinci talks about without theory, you're like, on a ship without seeing anywhere to go, without having navigation. And yet most of Agile is built without theory right now. They say, oh, it's complex. You hear this all the time, oh, it's complex. Well, you know what? In every complex situation, there is a lot of stuff you can know. The theories of lean flow and the theory of constraints give it to you, and you use that to unobscure the complex ones you don't. Now, I know I could say to open up and let you see it, but I like the word unobscure because complex relationships are obscured, but you can unobscure them by finding them. So to me, it's that activity of not illustrating them like they've always been there, illuminating them, but rather they're now obscured. How do you unobscure them? Anyway, I'm going to get this one up on YouTube. And one thing here, other resources, if you go to the YouTube playlist, I don't usually put the Amplio Consulting Educators posts. Every now and then I put one up here because they're so useful. But I did this yesterday. How we got here, this was like, I look back at since I got into software development in 1970, 71. And in fact, I'm a student, go back even further because I've listened to people like, Gerald Weinberg and Tom Gilb, who are older, started earlier than me. Jerry's not around anymore, unfortunately, but Tom is a good friend of mine. I talk to him every week. Well, there are reasons we got to where we got to, and we're at a major shift. I think we're at one of the biggest shifts in the industry, and we've had a lot of shifts in the industry. And those people who recognize it and recognize that what got us here isn't going to work in the future, and that what worked for early adopters and innovators isn't working for the masses are going to be in an opportunity that is great. So I can't remember who it was Thoreau or Emerson who said, now like all times is a good time if you know what to do. And I think that's what I'm trying to provide for people. Anyway, any last questions? Well, good. Well, again, one way to ask questions is get on the, on LinkedIn, one of the user groups we have, and I'll mention this if you want to learn more, actually, yeah, I'll just show you the easiest way to learn more. Go to Amplio University or as you're in the ACOP. On here, it says there's the LinkedIn group right here. This is where I like questions asked as well. Okay, well, take care. Great Thanksgiving for everybody. Wishes. And I'll see you next Tuesday. I forget what I'm doing next Tuesday. Let me just put it up here because I remember I said,
Do we
uh,
have something at 2 today?
yeah, those of you who are in the ACE program, I'm doing something at 2
Okay.
Eastern. And what I'm going to do there is I'm going to take the conversation we started yesterday and take it further, and it will be an extension of this. Now, after this session, this Tuesday sessions will be recaps and things for when new people come on. I've done that because we've been getting new people for some reason. They all seem to be on the East Coast or even further. So this is a new. We have 6 1-hour sessions a week for 3 weeks, and then 1 week off to give a break to catch up. But people don't go to all the, well, some do actually, and I appreciate that. But the intention is people can pick and choose which ones they go to based on the curriculum. Yeah. So I'll see you at 2 o'clock my time today, and I'll see the rest of you next week. Take care.
I don't know. Take care.